Good afternoon. I am Dr. JoAnne Alvarez, Director of Diversity, Equity, and Belonging for the Fort Wayne Warsaw campus, and I want to thank each of you for joining us today. Ivy Tech Community College is dedicated to establishing a sustainable culture where everyone is respected, accepted, and valued, with a commitment to civility in which we encourage professional and academic development with open communication, honesty, empathy, and respect. The Office of Diversity, Equity, and Belonging seeks to create a platform to foster dialogue on topics that may sometimes lead to uncomfortable but necessary conversations that can express differing or controversial viewpoints. As an institution of higher learning, we know the importance of having discussions where people can safely touch on social issues and current events. Today's presentation on DACA Fall 2021 legal updates can be difficult for some, and we ask that you listen to learn and listen without judgment. To keep our presentation moving, we ask audience members to mute themselves. However, we do encourage you to submit your questions. Questions may be submitted to the chat or sent to me privately throughout the presentation. We will do our best to have those questions answered and addressed by our guest speaker, either during the presentation or at the conclusion as she decides. Remember, this is an opportunity to create dialogue, ask questions, and learn. We plan to continue discussions and programs in a safe, open learning environment for all. A huge thank you to Laura Pontius and the Fort Wayne Neighborhood Christian Legal Clinic for partnering with Goli Amigos for today's presentation. As advisor to the student organization, I am proud to share the mission of Goli Amigos, which is to educate, engage, and support Ivy Tech students while promoting events and leadership opportunities that advance the Latino culture. With that, I would like to introduce you to the office intern and secretary of Goli Amigos, Maggie Beecraft.
Thank you, JoAnne. Hello, everyone. As JoAnne said, I am the secretary for the student organization Goli Amigos here at the Fort Wayne campus. So we are super excited to introduce you all to Laura. Laura Pontius is an immigration attorney, consultant, and public speaker specializing in immigration law and policy for individuals, businesses, churches, and nonprofits. In her practice, Laura has assisted individual clients and corporations from numerous countries around the world. She frequently presents on immigration law and policy topics and regularly appears on panels and roundtable discussions. She is a member of the American Immigration Lawyers Association and serves on various local and national boards, including the Fort Wayne Neighborhood Christian Legal Clinic and the Immigration Alliance. She graduated from the University of Wyoming College of Law with honors and earned her Bachelor of Arts in International Studies from IU Bloomington. So without further ado, Laura Pontius.
Well, thank you so much, Maggie and Dr. JoAnne. It's so nice to be here. Thank you to everyone for joining. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that we can get the PowerPoint going, so that you guys can see kind of what I have for sharing today. Kind of give me a thumbs up if you can see that, Dr. There we go, awesome. And like they said, I am really happy to receive questions while I'm talking. So please feel free to just put stuff in the chat box. I have it up and I'm monitoring it. And I will be throughout our time together. So like they said, I am an immigration attorney and I work with a number of organizations, but today I'm here with the Neighborhood Christian Legal Clinic. And I wanted to tell you just a tiny bit about this organization because the clinic does amazing work throughout the state of Indiana. They have offices in Fort Wayne and also in Indianapolis, but that doesn't mean if you don't live in those two cities, you can't use the clinic. They do all of their intake online or through the phone, and they have interpreters. So if English is not your first language, it's a great organization. I think they have interpreters for hundreds of different languages. So please feel free to reach out to them if you need any kind of legal advice or assistance. One quick reminder before we proceed, I am talking about DACA today, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. What I'm sharing with you today is legal information, but it's not specific advice for your case. And I'm also going to just remind everyone not to share confidential information about your specific case with me in the chat, because if it's not just with me, it's with everybody on the chat, and then it's no longer confidential. So another reminder is immigration law is very complex and changes a lot, and every detail matters. So by that, what I mean is your process is very different than your friends or your cousins or your sisters. All those little details about your story and your dates of when you came, they really matter. So please don't spend your energy and time comparing your immigration case to your neighbors or your family members, because it's very likely that they're very different. If you have questions, I just encourage you to reach out to an immigration attorney or someone in the community who can help you on your specific case. So again, today we are going to cover these 4 main areas. First, I'm going to just talk about what is DACA, because there might be some of us who aren't aware, what is this program? How did it come into being? What is it all about? I'm going to cover a little bit on that. And then we'll talk about who is eligible for getting DACA, getting an approval for this program. There have been some recent changes to DACA, which was kind of what spurred this event on, was that, there's kind of been a big shift lately. And I think it's important for those of you who have DACA or know people with DACA to, fully understand what the changes are and where we might be headed with those changes. And then I'll finish up by touching on some common questions that I get kind of day to day from my DACA clients, from different organizations about DACA and how things work. And again, if your question isn't answered in our presentation and what I'm speaking about, please feel free to reach out and ask your general question in the chat. So first, I'm going to start with just what is DACA. I mean, first, kind of in that image, you can see DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA. So a lot of times people aren't always sure if DACA and Dreamers are the same. There's really no legal program for Dreamers, but DACA is a legal program that's been established. The Dreamer group of individuals, of young immigrants, often qualify for DACA, but not all do. So sometimes people get those two things confused. So just wanted to point that out. The program was originally created all the way back in 2012. It feels like a long time ago now, under President Obama. And it was created through a legal mechanism available to the executive branch, available to presidents, called an executive order. So it's not something that is a law. It's not something that Congress voted on and is, solidified in law, which is one of the big issues with this DACA program. It was created by a president, which means theoretically it could be dismantled or ended by a president. So it started in 2012. And really the aim here, the Obama administration kind of understood that there is this group of young immigrants who came to the United States when they were very, very young, and really in every sense of the word are Americans except for documentation purposes. Growing up in schools, sometimes some of my DACA clients don't speak a second language beyond English because they've never been outside of the United States. So this, the Obama administration decided we need to create a program for these individuals to be able to work lawfully, kind of have some sort of protection from being deported from the United States. So essentially, if these young individuals met certain guidelines, and we'll talk about what those are, they could get DACA approval for 2 years at a time. And then this was created to be renewable every 2 years. A really big, wonderful feature that has also caused a lot of political fighting about this program is that it also made people eligible for work authorization. So getting a work permit. Sometimes it's called a work permit. Sometimes it's called employment authorization document. They're all the same thing. But the idea behind this was if you're approved for DACA, then you can lawfully work. And that was also a 2-year renewal process. So every 2 years you had to renew your DACA approval and renew your work permit. A really important piece to know about how DACA was originally created and how it still exists, it's not lawful status. So someone with lawful status is someone who has a green card, someone who is a citizen, someone who is here as a student on a student visa. Those are all lawful status where you are given certain days, certain months or years to be in the United States, lawfully living and working. This program is more, they call it deferred action for a reason, because the idea behind it is the government is deferring, they're stopping any action on your immigration case. So essentially what this means is that if you have DACA, if you've been approved, the government is not going to pursue deportation proceedings in your case. So it's not a lawful status, but it's also, a sense of being protected from the worst case scenario for a lot of people, which was being deported. It's kind of confusing because you do have lawful employment authorization, but your status is not lawful. So it's a really kind of an interesting mix of a program. So here, this slide has the different criteria that would make someone eligible for DACA. And this was the original criteria that was created back in 2012 when Obama first released and announced the program. So the first thing is you had to be under 31 as of June 15th, 2012. And this date probably seems arbitrary or not very important to most of you, but this is the day the program was created. So for the government purposes, it's pretty important. The second thing is you had to have come to the United States before turning 16. And this is a big one. If you don't meet that, you're not going to qualify for DACA. Another one is you have to be able to show that you've been living in the United States continuously since June 15th, 2007. And the idea here was in 2012, we wanted to give people a certain number of years where they've been living in the US, they haven't been, 2 years abroad and back, and then 2 years in another country and back. No, they've been in the United States, contributing in society, going to school, being a community member for these continuous years. That oftentimes is proved with school records, medical records. If you were working unlawfully, even sometimes that can be used to prove that you have that continuous residence. The fourth one is you had to be physically present in the US on the date this program was announced, which also seems arbitrary, doesn't it? But it's something that, again, you show with medical records, documentation that shows, I was living and working or going to school on that date. I was in the US. And also when you submit your application for DACA, you have to be in the US. Another real important part of this, of being eligible, is that you can't have any other type of lawful status as of the date it was created. So if you were here on a student visa, or if you, had a tourist visa on that date, that unfortunately would disqualify you from being able to get DACA. Kind of the keystone piece of this program that was very important to the Obama administration to be able to kind of get broad support for DACA was that you had to currently be in school pursuing a degree, a high school degree, or you have to be have served in the military and been discharged from the U.S. military honorably. So I've had people satisfy this requirement a number of ways. It doesn't have to just be attending in-person high school. A lot of times people do GED programs, or they were doing language training programs. Those kinds of things would qualify someone for this education requirement. Probably the most important part is the criminal history requirement. So to be able to get DACA, you can't be convicted of a felony. And a felony, it's kind of like what we consider the worst of the worst crimes, right? So murder, rape, drug trafficking, armed robbery, you know, the very worst types of crimes. But also, you can't be convicted of 2 or more significant misdemeanors. This is kind of a term that hadn't really been used by the government before, and it's caused a lot of confusion across the country because a lot of crimes are defined differently state by state. So something that occurred in Indiana that might be considered a significant misdemeanor might not be in Illinois. So this is where, if you do, you know, a lot of times clients, you know, had a criminal history, we would say it's really important that you talk with an immigration attorney who can kind of compare and see, do you have a significant misdemeanor? These are typically less serious crimes, so not your murders, but maybe you had a DUI, or maybe you, like I had a client once that stole a sweatshirt that was worth $25. That didn't rise to the level of a significant misdemeanor in the state that I was applying for him for. The last part of being eligible for DACA is you don't pose a threat to national security or public safety. And with this one, they're really trying to say, are you a terrorist? And if you are, we're not going to give you DACA. Being a terrorist is something that the government pretty easily is able to find out about you. So it would pretty quickly disqualify someone. And then public safety is more along the lines of, have you been a nuisance? Sometimes the domestic violence convictions or accusations would, you know, make someone not safe for the public, but may not rise to that significant misdemeanor. It kind of depends on, again, the state that you're in. So those are the basic things that you had to have to be eligible for DACA. One of the really interesting things about DACA is that you also could apply for something called advanced parole. And it's essentially a document that enables you to travel internationally while you have DACA. It's an application you send into the government at the same time you apply for DACA, and it allows you to leave and also return lawfully. Now, why is the return lawfully part important? Well, as some of you might know, to be able to get a green card, one of the requirements is that you have a lawful entry to the United States. A lot of individuals who might qualify for DACA or who have DACA don't have a lawful entry because how they were originally brought to the United States was not lawful. It was without documentation. So a lot of people were really excited about being able to apply for advanced parole because it meant, oh, I can leave the country and come back and have that lawful entry, so that if I get married to a US citizen, if I have an employer that's going to sponsor me, if I you know, get a certain job or, you know, qualify in some way, I have that lawful entry, which is a big requirement for a green card. So there are some really good things about having advanced parole as a perk of DACA. Again, it allows you to leave and return. It also enabled a lot of students the opportunity to do courses abroad, which, you know, is a major part of a lot of higher education programming. It also enabled people to leave and be with sick family members or family members that were elderly that they hadn't really interacted with for decades. So that's a really, really great part of advanced parole as well. The disadvantages of this is that it's somewhat risky. There is some risk involved with leaving the United States because When you re-enter, you all might know this, but it's really up to the border agent. They have a lot of what we call discretion about who they enter, who they allow to enter to the United States. So if a border agent looked at your documents, felt like there was something that wasn't quite right, they could say, no, we're not going to allow you to re-enter because you don't have lawful status, you don't have a green card, you don't have a visa to lawfully enter, you just have advanced parole. So the other thing about advanced parole is that you had to have kind of a reason why you were going to leave. You couldn't just say, I want to go on a cruise, or I want to go study abroad. Yeah, or not study, but I want to go vacation. Those things wouldn't really be granted for advanced parole applications. But study, working opportunities, and then family, relatives who are sick or elderly are the reasons you could travel. So it's not just something that works for every scenario. The other thing is when someone is granted an advanced parole, they aren't given a long amount of time to be gone. It's short, and it's also kind of expensive to apply. $360 to be exact. Every time you apply, you have to pay that filing fee. I don't see any questions in the chat box, so I'm going to just continue talking. But please feel free to jump in if you have questions about any of this. Okay, so since DACA was created in 2012, it has been on a crazy roller coaster, which probably most of you know. Legally, it's been on this roller coaster. So right away, there was opposition, mostly from, Obama, anti-Obama crowd, about kind of the legality of the program. Was it created lawfully? Can we really give work permits to people who don't have lawful status? So questions about not only how it was created, but the content, the substance of the program. So, there were arguments and discussions about kind of if it's lawful. There were no major lawsuits kind of toward the start of it. It kind of was a well-oiled machine that worked well and gave work authorization, advanced parole to a lot of recipients. So I think the number was about 600,000 to 800,000 people were able to get DACA and work and kind of have an exhale about their fear of being deported. So that was great. I'm going to highlight kind of the last few years because that's really when a lot of the major legal battles have happened. So, of course, when Trump was inaugurated, there was a lot of anti-immigrant rhetoric across the board. But specifically, it kind of came to a head in September of 2017, where Trump announced that he was going to terminate the DACA program. And like I said earlier, this program was originally created by a president via executive order. So how Trump announced it is, I'm going to do an executive order to dismantle the program. So there were a lot of legal questions about, well, I guess he can do this. Can he do this? Is this lawful? These people, a very large amount of individuals have been relying on this program. They're working, they have work authorization. There's kind of an expectation that they've been given that this program will continue. So he announces the termination. Then in January, there's a lawsuit that's filed, and a district court says to the federal government, we're going to, we're ordering you to accept certain DACA applications. So even though Trump cancels the program officially, there are certain applications that go forward. Well, then later in April, there's the government doesn't necessarily comply with that order. So another district court says you need to accept these applications. This kind of goes back and forth, where a federal court judge says, accept it, continue the program. And then the federal government agency says, no, we're not going to. So there's a lot of kind of legal fighting. And that kind of came to a head in May of 2018, where Texas and 9 other states, they sued about the legality of the original program. So whereas before a lot of the lawsuits were like about the contents of the program, this was more about, well, we don't think it was lawful from the start. We don't think it was created lawfully. So that went back and forth. There was some agreement, some disagreement. Eventually in November 2018, a district court says, well, maybe it's not lawful, but you have to keep accepting these applications because people are relying on it. They have work, they have jobs, their employers are counting on it. You have to continue accepting these. So there are a lot of lawsuits happening all across the country in federal courts in every part of the country. And so eventually the Supreme Court, between 2018 and 19 says, this has gotten out of hand. There are people issuing legal decisions that conflict with each other. It's out of hand. So we're going to consolidate. We're going to keep all of these cases in one, and we're going to hear it as the U.S. Supreme Court. We want you to bring your best arguments to us as to why it should continue or why it shouldn't, and we're going to hear this issue together. So that happened in 2019, and then in June of 2020, they came out with their announcement and they said they were very careful about what they said, but basically they said that the way that he terminated DACA was unlawful. The method he used was unlawful. And I do see we have a question. The question is, did Trump's order allow existing DACAs to be renewed, but no new ones? That did happen, but that was later in 2020. So yes, you're right. That is some more recent legal battle, but that is part of what one of the legal solutions was, that DACA can be renewed, but not the original ones. And actually, we're seeing history repeat itself because that's kind of where we are right now, too. So this was in a big way when the Supreme Court made this announcement in June of 2020. A lot of immigrant advocates were very happy because to them it meant that the program was going to be continuing for at least a while longer. The Supreme Court says, that was unlawful. You have to restart the program. But the federal government doesn't. So the government doesn't comply with the Supreme Court, and the Trump administration made a lot of big changes that really made it so people had a hard time applying. It was confusing. The criteria shifted, the work permit length shifted. And so then in December of last year, a court says, this has gotten out of hand, and this is again a district court, and it says, I'm restoring the program back to where it was in 2012. So as of December 2020, we were excited because we had a DACA program that was not 1 year employment, it was 2 year employment, and it was advanced parole, and you could apply as a new applicant. However, we have had some not so great news this summer, where Texas again is taking issue with the DACA program. So there's a specific judge in Texas who heard a lawsuit that was brought in his courtroom, and it basically, the lawsuit said, DACA is not lawful. We don't think the program's good. And he agrees, and he says, we're going to narrow this program down because I don't think it was lawful. So that's really what we're here to talk about today. But I see a lot of confused faces because that was a crazy history. That was a crazy legal journey. And unfortunately, it's not over. And this is not everything. What you're seeing on the screen is not everything that has happened to the DACA program. It's been very highly tense. I see another question, so I'm going to hop over there. It says, if someone fails to renew their DACA because of the changes, does it affect their ability to apply in the future? So typically, if someone fails to renew their DACA, when the program is fully restored and operating, they can generally reapply as a first-time applicant, and it doesn't affect their ability. That is a little different right now because we're under this district court the Texas judge were under his current rendition of DACA. So I'm going to go into that a little bit. Some of these questions might be answered. I want you to know kind of where DACA stands today, but also one of the reasons I did this slide was to show you that it's very likely going to change. And it's really, really important that if you have DACA, want to apply, have friends, to really check with an immigration attorney before you do anything, because it's likely that the program is different than you think. So this judge in Texas in July of this year, again, he looked at the way the program was created and said that was unlawful. It was unlawfully created via an executive order. However, this judge, he said, I'm going to allow DACA to continue for people who have already received an approval, and for people who are renewing every 2 years, because, you know, his reasoning was there's an expectation. They have employment, their employers are expecting them to be able to renew. They've been relying on this for almost a decade now, and so it's too unfair to not allow them. So he's allowing DACA to continue for people who already have it and are renewing their DACA. So what this means, if you do have DACA right now, you're still protected. DACA is still alive for you, and you'll be able to continue renewing for every 2 years under this Texas judge, his order. However, if you are eligible for DACA, if you look at that eligibility and you think, oh man, I think I would qualify, but you've never applied, what's happening right now is Department of Homeland Security, which is kind of the federal part of the government accepting applications, they are going to receive your application, but they can't process it, which means your application will sit in a pile waiting for the next step of DACA, the next thing that will happen legally to DACA. So they'll accept it, they'll say, we received this on this date, but they're not going to start looking through it. They can't issue a DACA approval, they can't issue work authorization for someone who is applying for the first time. So in my mind, this is good and bad. It's good because it means the federal government has reason to believe that they'll be able to start processing those at some point. I think that everyone knows DACA will change again. They'll probably open it up again to first-time applicants. We just don't know when that will be, when the other lawsuits will be happening. It's bad because people who qualify should be able to apply and get this benefit right now. Another thing that this Texas judge decision means is that he was real careful about advanced parole and said, I recognize that people use advanced parole for really legitimate reasons, for working, for study, for visiting sick families. So that is going to remain open for people who have DACA and are renewing it. So if you're in that category, you've received it already and you're renewing, you'll be able to use advanced parole with caution about, whether you should travel or not. Another thing, if you've sent in your application for renewal, it's probably already been partially processed. It's likely it'll continue as normal. So, the time frame kind of differs based on how many applications they receive. But essentially, if you have submitted your renewal on time, you have kind of included everything that's required, I don't think you should expect anything other than kind of a normal processing for you. Okay, so there's another question. For those who already have DACA, but the administration is behind on processing applications, do you believe they will still be able to renew DACA? The answer is yes. According to this Texas judge, the idea is for those who have been granted DACA and are, have already submitted renewals, the government delay doesn't affect whether they'll be able to receive an approval of their renewal application. It's just a government delay at this point, which is really common with USCIS and with the different government agencies that are processing these applications. So essentially, the main thing that the Texas judge, his decision was basically, we're not going to let people apply for the first time for DACA anymore. There's not going to be any more of that. That was his decision, and in my mind, it's kind of to be determined about what is next. So I'm going to go through some common questions that I get about DACA, the program generally, some of the advanced parole things, but please keep putting questions in the chat box. I love hearing from you. Okay, there's another one. Can Biden provide an executive order and restart DACA the way Obama did? This is a really good question. The answer is officially yes, Biden could do that. But I think why he hasn't is that DACA would essentially be in the same place it is legally right now that it's been. So, Obama created it via executive order, and it's had all these legal attacks because it was created via executive order throughout the years. So creating another executive order, I think to the Biden administration, they think it's not going to change anything. What we really need is for Congress to come together, which is a high hope, and kind of make this into law instead of an executive order. So, if Congress were to do that, then it would be really difficult to dismantle it. Unlike an executive order is fairly easy to attack legally. And we've seen that with DACA. It's been fairly easy to change it and halt it and restart it because an executive order doesn't hold the weight that legislation would if Congress were to act. So it's really important to talk to your elected officials and remind them how important this is to our communities across the US. So, okay, one of the things I hear a lot about DACA is, oh, if I get DACA, can I become a citizen? Well, officially the program isn't created for that to be like a direct route. Is it possible? Yes, because of that advanced parole piece. So a lot of times, individuals who are DACA recipients are people who are brought to the United States without documentation and they don't have a lawful entry. Like I said earlier, to get a green card, a big requirement, one of many, is to have a lawful entry into the United States. So DACA and plus advanced parole can a lot of times solve that piece of the green card problem for the dreamers, for DACA recipients. Now, you still have to qualify for a green card on some other basis, like, having a US citizen, family member, or in a work, an employer petition for you, those kinds of things. But it can help with that piece that's sometimes difficult to get around. A green card is something you have to hold for 5 years typically before you can become a citizen. So it's not a direct path, but it does make it possible for certain people to become citizens. And actually it's worked that way for several. The second one is, will DACA become a permanent program under Biden? We're hoping that it will, because there have been a lot of polls and studies taken in the United States that show the majority of Americans support making this program permanent. So the majority of Americans think that people brought to the United States as youth who have grown up in the United States, who work and contribute and have an education and don't have a criminal background, the majority of Americans say, yes, we want those are the type of people we want to be permanent here. So there's bipartisan support for it, but immigration as a larger issue is such a hot topic and such a touchy thing politically, that this one piece is often this one DACA piece is often used as a bargaining chip, really by both sides, to be able to get some bigger reforms. So my hope and my dream would be that this would be standalone legislation, that there would just be a program just for DACA, just for people in this category, because then it wouldn't be politicized like it has been. But I'm afraid that I am overly optimistic with that hope. Okay, another question, can I still apply for advanced parole? And this one, officially, yes, under the Texas judge's order, you can. If you have DACA, you can. But I want to caution everyone about that, because there are a number of things happening now that might prevent you from coming back into the United States safely and swiftly. One major one is COVID is still very much something that is keeping people out. Not only if you have been vaccinated or can prove, but there are different travel bans that are unfortunately still kind of in effect with different countries because of COVID. So you have to be really careful with travel overseas and really time this very well and have a very well thought out strategy about your travel before using advanced parole. This is a scenario where I would really encourage you to talk to an immigration attorney and plan that strategy out. Okay, number 5, can I apply for DACA for the first time right now? No. So this is something I think will change, but I just can't say when it will change. We have seen, in the last 3 weeks, the Biden administration has released some announcements saying they want to make a rule about DACA that would make it a little more permanent, but not a law. So there are a number of ways that laws can come about. Congress is the main way, but there's also this federal rulemaking. So we've kind of heard rumors that there might be some sort of federal rule that could help, DACA be more available, but there's nothing right now that's available in that way. Number 6, the question is, if I was issued a 1-year work permit, when will I get a 2-year work permit? So I think somebody asked this question earlier that, along the line of all these legal battles and changes to DACA, one of the changes that the Trump administration made was, instead of issuing 2-year work permits, they issued 1-year work permits. This made it very expensive for people applying, because it was $500 to apply every time. So instead of every 2 years, they don't have to do $500 every year just for the work permit. So after the Supreme Court said, what you did was unlawful, Trump, then the federal agency that's kind of responsible for processing those applications, they started sending out these kind of correction work permits, where the ones that had been issued 1 year, they reissued them and made them 2-year. So this was kind of I had several clients who didn't get them right away. Some people are still waiting. So it's kind of a lot of processing time for people, and really, I think if you look at that legal battle slide, you'll understand why the federal government has a hard time keeping up with all the different processes and rules, because they've been shifting so much. Okay, I have a question about, is there a way to review your application after submitting? Is there a delay currently? Review your application. I think maybe this question is asking, can you check on your application after you submit it? There's not really a way to review, if you're wanting to see a copy of what you submitted, unless you made a copy, the government check for errors. Okay, yeah, unless you made a copy before submitting, the government, they do scan it when they receive it, but they don't let you access that file. So, you know, if you feel like there was a major error made, this would be a good time to get in touch with an immigration attorney. They can request a copy of your immigration file. This takes a long time and can be a little bit expensive, but if you feel like there's a very serious error that might cause problems for you later, that would probably be an important step to take. And then the second part of that question was, is there a delay currently? There's always a delay with the federal government. I would have to kind of check on you know, current, the most recent data I have seen is about 4, 5, 6 months for DACA applications. And really, as far as processing times go, that's fairly quick in immigration. Usually we're looking at 12, 15, 16 months for most immigration applications. So, okay, and then the 7th question on this slide is one that we got a lot of questions about this when the program was first created in 2012. And there was a big concern about, you know, I'm undocumented and I'm giving the government my name, my address, my, you know, address history, my employment history, my education documents. I'm giving all of this really sensitive information to the federal government. And so there's a lot of concern about, well, what is the federal government going to do with this? Now, under Obama, there were a lot of assurances made about this information does not leave the federal agency you send it to. So that is a group called USCIS, which stands for United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. I see people nodding. You probably know of USCIS. So under Obama, there was a kind of a really strong assurance made that this information does not go to ICE. It does not go to Customs for enforcement. This stays with this one agency over here. Now, when Trump was elected, there was a lot of concern about this again, because again, there was a lot of anti-immigrant campaigning, rhetoric, slogans, and you know, a lot of people who had DACA were very afraid about what was going to happen to their personal information they had submitted years prior. So we had some assurances, though they weren't very strong, we had some assurances that that information was still going to remain just with that USCIS agency. I haven't really noticed this as a concern under the Biden administration, but the policy that was kind of originally enacted under Obama hasn't been reversed about keeping this information with USCIS. So, you know, this hasn't really made the news cycle. People haven't really been super concerned about what's happening to their information now, but it remains the same, that information is supposed to stay just with USCIS. And I personally haven't received any kind of reports or information otherwise, which I'm glad to share that with you, that you know, there could be scenarios where that has happened, but I imagine those are drug traffickers who might have gotten into the DACA program earlier, or people who have felonies. If anyone has gotten into terrorist groups or they're otherwise a threat to public safety, at that point, maybe that information has been shared, but I don't have a way to say yes or no on that. So I don't think I have any other questions right now, so I'm going to continue on. So, okay, I've kind of given you a lot of information, a lot of legal roller coaster. Here's where we stand now. But kind of for those of you who might have DACA or have friends or family with DACA, you probably think, well, what do we do now? This program has gone through so many changes and it's probably going to change again, but we don't know. Well, the best thing to do is keep yourself informed about these changes, because the worst thing is that there is a change that affects you and you weren't informed about it. So the organization I love the most is called United We Dream. They oftentimes I'm not kidding about this. They oftentimes are quicker to send updates on the DACA program specifically, that one alone, than my immigration attorney groups that I'm part of. So I'm part of several national groups that send fairly frequent updates, but really it's like moments after a court hearing, moments after a policy change with DACA. United We Dream, I get a text, I get an email. Ooh, okay, I've got that update. So you can sign up on their website for the same thing. They have English and Spanish. They might have other languages as well, but I know they have English and Spanish versions of their website, but they will send you real-time updates about these changes. And they also have really good plain English, not any legalese, about what does it mean? Here's this change that happened. Well, okay, well, what does that mean? They have guides and explanations on their website about those things. So I highly encourage you to check them out, sign up to stay informed. The other thing I'm going to recommend is that USCIS, the agency we talked about, it's important that they have your most current address, because if there is a change, like for example, the 1 year to 2 year work permit, sometimes they just automatically send those things out without any advance warning. And if they don't have your current address, they're just going to send it to wherever your last address that they have on file. So if it's been a while since you've renewed, or let's say you renewed a year ago and you've moved since then, it's really important that you keep your address current with them, so that when they have a notice to send to you, you get it right away. There's an easy way to do this, and I have the website there on the slide. The form is called AR-11. It's a really easy form, surprisingly easy for a federal government form, and it's online. Basically, you just have to say, here's where I used to live, here's where I live now, and then here's, my application receipt number, and then they'll be able to update you online. Again, I want to reiterate the importance of, if you have specific questions, if you have something unique that's happened in your case with DACA, or if you've had a change, let's say you got married to a US citizen, or you have a work shift that might impact your immigration, it's really important to visit with an attorney or a legal provider to kind of review, well, how does that affect DACA? Could we use DACA in combo with advanced parole to do this? There's a lot of strategy involved, a lot of moving pieces. And it's really confusing. I mean, even as an immigration attorney, there are a lot of different pieces that are moving around. So it's somewhat important for you to work closely with a legal provider who kind of is able to have that bird's eye view of your specific case. So friendly reminder again, not to listen to your siblings and cousins about their case and well, they only took 2 months. Well, they might have a really different scenario than you do. So that's all I have for you now, but I would love to hear any questions from you, and you're welcome to, if you want to on video or on the chat, it's fine with me, whatever works for everyone. I do see you have another question in the chat. I have students who have lost their DACA due to different issues, including drinking and driving. Is there any way to regain DACA if someone loses it? Officially, yes, there are ways to regain DACA. This would involve the help of an attorney, because essentially what you have to do is prove to the government through extensive documentation that the person had been rehabilitated, that the person qualifies now, or they've done certain things that make it so they're not they don't have these criminal issues anymore. A lot of times this includes like getting affidavits or notarized letters from community members, teachers, if there are clergy, church, religious professionals involved in their lives. It is possible to do. It's not common. It's not something that is commonly granted, because the criteria are pretty specific. And if there is a crime that disqualifies you, that sometimes is a little difficult to overcome. It's been done before, but it's not common. Okay, I have another question. With the employment and reapplying every 1 to 2 years, would it be beneficial to expand that to 3 to 5 years? Absolutely. It would absolutely be beneficial. I think for a number of reasons. One, it would be less expensive and less headache for the applicants. Two, it would create less administrative work for the agency who are constantly processing these renewals. However, I believe that, the filing fees that are involved in this, it's about $500 that you pay to the government. Those fees kind of fuel the machine. So a lot of times the government can prove through, budget tracking that, look, these filing fees are really good for our bottom line. And so there's not a lot of motivation to kind of elongate that, because then the government loses some of their, some of the budgetary inflow that comes from the filings. Okay, there's another question. Do parents have to apply on behalf of their children, or do they apply themselves? And is this dangerous for undocumented parents? Well, it depends. I mean, the person who qualifies for DACA would need to apply in their own, with their own information. DACA is not something that when you're granted DACA, your spouse gets it, or when you're granted DACA, your children get it. That's not how DACA works. It's a very individualized program. Unlike, for example, a student visa. When somebody receives a student visa, a lot of times their spouse gets an F2, which is a spouse of a student. And so DACA is not that way. It's very much one person, one application, one grant of DACA. And it's that way for the work permit as well. When you're granted DACA and you're granted a work permit, they're not going to give work permits to the whole family. It's based on if the individual qualifies. The second part of that question was, is it dangerous for undocumented parents? Again, it depends if they're, if the person qualifies, but also, looking at the eligibility requirements, you'd want to make sure that the crimes don't prevent somebody from applying. I'm thinking this question maybe means, is it dangerous for someone to include undocumented parents on their DACA application? That's what I'm thinking this question means. And again, the answer to this, what we have been told from different government agencies, is that that information remains with USCIS. And I've hesitated with this on other applications, not related to DACA, but for example, green card. I've done applications where I have a US citizen who's married an immigrant, and that immigrant's family members, they want to write letters supporting, the application, talking about the relationship, but they're undocumented. And what we tend to do is we look at, their background and their criminal history. Do they have kind of glaring red flags, things that would make them, a very serious target for the government? And if so, we wouldn't include them. And I've never had that scenario. I've always, said, well, have you been a drug trafficker? Are you involved with gangs? Okay, if you're not, then we're good. We're safe to include your letter in this application. Sorry, I didn't understand that question. Okay, another question. Thanks for sending all the questions, everyone. I have a friend who is a DACA recipient and has been trying to get her high school diploma. She finished all her credits, but the school requires her to pass a final exam. The school has ISTEP, but she asked me if it is possible to take the ASVAB instead. Is that possible? And I don't actually know what ASVAB is. Do you know, Dr. JoAnne? No. Maggie, do you know? Okay. If you would like to kind of expand upon that question, I'd love to be able to answer this. I think I can speak to generally. I can drop it in the chat box. There's a website that talks about all the different things that would count for that education requirement. And this might just be the answer to your question. Oh, the military placement test. Okay, perfect. It is very possible that this would count because there are a number of different ways to satisfy that education requirement. At the end of our session, I'll drop that in the chat box, or make sure that you get that information, because it's a list I haven't memorized, but I know that USCIS has a long list of different things that would qualify for that education requirement. There's another question about what is the average cost to file DACA through your services? Okay, so the clinic, the Neighborhood Christian Legal Clinic, they do not charge for their services, their legal services. So the average cost is $0 for the legal work. Now, there is always a filing fee. The clinic does not pay that for the applicant. You're going to have to pay that whether you work with an attorney or you file it on your own. Regardless, you have to pay that. I believe right now it's $495 for the filing fee. So the Neighborhood Christian Legal Clinic, and I don't know if I included our website. I can do that too. Let me just make a really quick note. Let me put the clinic website and USCIS, the education stuff, in the chat box as we're closing out, because then that will be helpful for everybody. Yes, that's a good reminder. The Mexican Consulate will help cover DACA costs. I believe they cover filing fees. I don't know if they cover attorney fees. Do you know, Dr. JoAnne, are they covering any legal fees? No. Okay. So, yeah, I believe that they're helping out with the $495 filing fee. Another question, can you apply for DACA before you need something like a work permit? Is it something you can do in advance? So, you have to have DACA approved before you can apply, before you can work lawfully. So common practice is to, when you send in an application for DACA, you send in the work permit application together, so that when the government approves the DACA, they automatically approve the work permit. So it's not really something we recommend doing separately. I can't think of a time when I've ever done just DACA and not also the work permit. I'm trying to think. It's been many years. I can't think of one time where I've done that. But I mean, I guess you could. It just, usually when people are applying for the program, they're wanting the work permit is more important than the deferred action piece. So, and they're going to be processed at the same time. So a lot of times, you'll get your DACA approval notice and your work permit approval notice the same day in the mail, because they kind of keep them together as they process through the government. I'm not seeing any other messages. So I'm gonna stay on the video. I'm gonna stop my screen share and drop some things in the chat, and I'll send it over to Dr. JoAnne to kind of wrap us up, and I'll drop these things in the chat. So thank you so much, everyone. Please continue asking questions if you'd like, and I'll hop back in a few minutes.
Thank you, Laura. Appreciate the information. Very, very good information. And thank you to all of you for submitting questions. That will help generate the discussion, especially when we share the video with others. And so if you all would like me to share this video with you, why don't you throw me your email in the chat? And then this way I can make sure you get a copy of this video in case you want to share it with family or friends. And you can send it to me privately, or you can drop it in where everyone can see it. And then, of course, if you want to unmute and ask a question or you have a comment, you can go ahead and do that as well. I think, Laura, you jump in whenever you're ready. Thank you, Lisette. And if you will, whoever the iPhone, will you send me your name if you prefer to do that privately? That's okay. But just send me your name, that way I can make sure that I am emailing the right people. Thank you. And then Maggie, office intern, is saying that she can also turn it into a Titan Tube link. I don't know if you all are aware, but we have something called Titan Tube, like YouTube, but it's all our Ivy Tech videos that we've put together in the past, and you can see all of our recordings there. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm going to answer this question about why do they limit what they can do with advanced parole? It's a really good question, not silly at all. Essentially, they're limiting it because otherwise I think they would be flooded with requests to do the advanced parole. And I think that they're trying to limit the amount of applications they're receiving. Okay, and I just put in the chat box a link to frequently asked questions from USCIS. Again, that is United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, the federal government agency. They are the ones that receive the applications and process them and make the decisions. So this FAQ, they have put together questions from almost 10 years of accepting DACA. They'll cover a lot of different things on that FAQ, and that is a direct source, a trusted website. It is a government website. It's not an immigration advocacy website. I want to make that clear. But that is information direct from the government. And then the other one I put in there is the legal clinic, their link. Once you go to that website, you can see that there are options for online intake, phone intake. Our in-person intake is still closed at this time. But again, we have attorneys working across the state with clients across the state. Unfortunately, we're limited to Indiana. People who are living in Indiana, our grants make it such that we can't go outside of our state. But if you have friends or family in other states, please reach out, because we have organizations we work closely with in other states as well.
Laura, and is it safe to guess that you have bilingual, if you or staff is bilingual to work with some of our parents or families?
Yes, absolutely. And like I said earlier, we have access to interpreters for a number of languages. We've actually been drawing upon our interpreters from Afghanistan a lot lately with some of the work we've been doing. So I've been surprised at how easy it is to access the interpretation services. But yes, we do have bilingual and interpretation services available.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
This has been extremely informative, so a huge thank you and shout out to you for reaching out on such an important topic. Big thank you to all of you for showing up and listening to what was being said and asking such wonderful questions. Laura has provided her, I believe, the email or the website to the organization if you need more information. And of course, you can always reach out to myself. I will just throw my email in the chat. Not that I can answer any questions on any of this, but I can direct you to resources if needed. Okay, so, and then of course, anything regarding Ivy Tech, contact me, because we want to see you here for another semester or get you through to graduation. So at this point, unless there are any remarks, questions, or comments, Laura, thank you very much. We appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thanks so much, everybody, for attending.